Loved Me Special Edition DVD. Please activate your navigation system now.
Any man who drinks Dom Perignon 52 can't be all bad.
I think of all the Bonds I did, The Spy Who Loved Me is the one I like best.
Spy Who Loved Me, I think, was probably one of the best, if not the best, James Bond of all time.
Nobody does it better. Makes me feel sad for the rest. Nobody does it half as good as you. Baby, you're the best.
Spring 1975. Cumby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman begin pre-production on The Spy Who Loved Me, the 10th James Bond film.
The title always intrigued me, The Spy Who Loved Me, as a very good Fleming title.
They sign Guy Hamilton to direct. Writers are brought in, but a serious problem develops. Producer Harry Saltzman's other investments create massive debts.
Technicolor and Eclair de Brie. Disasters. It proves, once and for all, if you like food, it doesn't mean you can run a restaurant.
Harry had gotten himself into a terrible financial mess with the Swiss bank, and he had pledged his shares of the company's stock, and they were foreclosing.
He owed a lot of money to various banks, and these letters would come in, and he would just rat-hole them in drawers and bags and not want to deal with them.
Well, the banks were very upset with this because they had a loan, and Harry had pledged his stock in the company as guaranteed a loan, but there was no way they could realize their guarantee.
It was a very trying time for everyone.
On top of the fights, on top of the problems of business, my mother had breast cancer, and she was very sick at that point, and I think that also complicated matters, at least for my father's reasoning and thoughts.
So they were planning to put Harry into bankruptcy, and this has, caused a huge amount of friction. And we had a succession of negotiations and with different people, different investment bankers.
Before I worked for Harry, I worked for a Saudi Arabian called Khashoggi. And I remember calling him and saying, you wouldn't by any chance be interested in buying half of James Bond, would you? And he said yes. That deal didn't go through.
My father didn't have the business acumen. He was eaten alive by the Wall Street of that time and a corporate takeover. It was out of his depth.
The company did go into a sort of liquidation, a hiatus, and it could not actually produce the James Bond film.
And after much, much ado, we won. Harry unfortunately lost his shares and therefore was out of the company.
So Cubby became the de facto representative of the company.
With the rights to the Bond films finally secured, producer Cubby Broccoli controls the fate of James Bond. Should he succeed, he alone will get the credit. Should he fail, he will have no one to blame but himself.
But that was not the end of our problems. In a way, that was just the prelude.
Because of a clause in Ian Fleming's agreement, no portion of his novel could be adapted into a screenplay. Cubby Broccoli would have to supervise the creation of a totally original storyline.
We went through certainly a dozen writers. Anthony Burgess was one. He came up with an idea. He said, I've got a great idea. Let me pitch it to you. And he wrote something up and he gave it to us. John Landis was a young writer at the time, recommended by MGM. And he did work with Guy Hamilton for a short time.
The turmoil in development takes its toll on director Guy Hamilton and the writers.
They'd been on the picture for a while, and because of the trouble with Harry and Cubby, they went away.
To bring the production back on track, Cubby turns to an experienced Bond director.
I became involved with The Spy Who Loved Me 10 years after I'd made You Only Live Twice.
With the director set, filmmakers dive into reworking the script.
We started to basically experiment and find the plot.
We sat around and thought, well, what are the intriguing things? And one of the intriguing things was there was an idea of a super tanker that swallowed boats. And so that developed into a super tanker that swallowed atomic submarines and captured them that way.
Which was also a bit like You Only Live Twice, but that nobody worries about that too much. And that's how we started.
Even without a completed script, Cubby Broccoli and Lewis Gilbert begin to assemble the key production team, including associate producer Bill Cartledge and production designer Ken Adam.
We thought, well, maybe we'll go out and shoot in the Far East again, because that's always exotic.
Which was interesting because I had quite a lot of contacts, of course. So the first thing that happened to me is I got sent back to Japan.
Lewis Gilbert said, oh, if you want to do something about the sea, there's this great underwater city that they have in Okinawa.
The Japanese had developed a sea laboratory which actually did rise up and sink into the sea.
We had the idea, well, maybe that could go underwater and that could be the villain's lair. Of course, you know, for a guy that lives under the ocean, he'd like to wipe out all people polluting the oceans.
Today, civilization as we know it is corrupt and decadent. Inevitably, it will destroy itself. I'm merely accelerating the process.
And I brought in a Christopher Wood, who I'd worked with on other films, and I knew that he was a great admirer of Bond books.
One day he rang me up when I was in France and said in his rather laid-back way, hello, love, how'd you like to write a James Bond film?
I discussed this with Cubby before I went on the film, and I said to him, one of the mistakes that they're making with the Roger films was that they were trying to turn him into Sean Connery.
Where is Ernst Stavro Blofeld?
You're hurting my arm.
I'll break it unless you tell me where those bullets go.
They should try and make him more towards the book of James Bond. Very English, very smooth, very good sense of humour.
Can you play any other tune?
Lewis, one of the funniest, sweetest men I've worked with. Great sense of humor. I think the reason we got on so well, we both have the same sense of humor.
I didn't give up the jokiness and I didn't give up the tongue-in-cheek because I felt that we needed to get back to that kind of thing.
Bond, what do you think you're doing?
Keeping the British hand up, sir.
Roger himself is an amusing man. Off the camera, he can be extraordinarily relaxed and funny. And of course, one tunes into this when one's writing for him.
All these things don't mean anything unless the story holds together. So our initial attack on the story, when we first met in Paris, was to see whether the relationship between the main characters and the basic plot was solid and good.
Even though the filmmakers soon have a script they approve of, the screenplay itself becomes the center of controversy.
As soon as our script came out, we were slapped with a plagiarism case by Kevin McClory, who claimed that we'd plagiarized a script that he'd written. And there was an injunction suit on the film. So we all had to fight this injunction suit through the summer in the courts in London. Finally, the injunction was denied, and we could go ahead and make the film. So there was a lot of legal background, a lot of legal conflict to get this film off the ground. And what's amazing is that it's probably the best of the Roger Moore films, and one of the best films that we made at the time. And maybe it was the conflict itself that caused everyone to feel we have to make this picture and it has to be good.
Despite all the hard work, the script still needs one more element, an exciting pre-credits sequence.
I was looking through a magazine one day, and I saw that this fellow had skied off El Capitan and then opened a parachute.
We discussed it, and I said, but is that possible?
Well, let's find this guy.
People have defined adventure as something having a large element of the unknown, and the unknown could kill you.
So we went to out to California, got a hold of Rick, and it turned out that he'd actually never done it.
He didn't actually ski off the mountain, but he very quickly said, but I could do it, and I know where I can do it.
He said, I can do it up in Mount Asgard in the Arctic Circle, but we can only be there for 6 weeks. All the rest of the time it's snowed in.
They sensed that it was going to be too expensive.
None of us were totally convinced. That's why we went out to Canada on that initial survey. And we went to the actual mountain, and we landed on the mountain, and we did all of the tests that we could do. And I kept looking at him and saying, are you sure you can do this, Rick? And he said, oh, yes, I can do it, you know.
They did this test footage of me standing on the edge of that sheer cliff in a bright red parka. That test footage came out so spectacular.
We went back with this footage, and Lewis and Cubby and the head of United Artists, Dan Risner, disappeared into the theatre, looked at our material, and we waited outside. We weren't allowed in. And they came out after 10 minutes and they said, do it.
This was way in advance of the beginning of the film. And Lewis Gilbert's idea was, well, if that doesn't work, we'll have plenty of time to figure out something else.
Well, sure enough, the weather gets bad. And for a couple of days, people sit around. Nothing's happening.
And the money kept getting more and more expensive, and they were clouded in.
And now the calls start coming in from London as the costs keep mounting. Has he done it yet?
Studios calling up asking what the hell's happening, and, you know, why are you ever going to do this?
Finally, Cubby said, I've got to call. I have a feeling this boy has decided not to do it. It's a very dangerous stunt.
In the end, it's only a movie, so we don't want anyone to be killed or injured. So Cubby did call up Rick.
And he said, look, Rick, if you have changed your mind about doing this stunt, you come down. There's no film in the world worth your life. And he said, Cubby, I'm only waiting for the wind.
And sure enough, the mountain's clear. The storm is ending. There's clouds swirling all about, but there's no winds, amazingly.
I was up there in a white suit with a red flag. I said to Rick, don't go until this red flag is buried in the snow. Whatever you hear on the radio, or whatever you think you hear, because there's so many terrible stories, aren't there, of things going wrong. The last thing I said to him was, go, Rick, don't forget you're James Bond. And I shoved the flag in the snow and buried myself in the snow.
Now, there was one problem. The master shot, the camera and the helicopter, they missed me.
There were 4 or 5 cameras on it. And, you know, the first one, he skied over the top of the camera, and the guy lost him. So that didn't bode well. And then we had another one where the guy had lost him. But there was one camera angle that took him all the way off and zoomed in and followed him all the way down. And it was one take and uncut, just one camera.
Christopher Wood came up with what I think was the masterstroke, which when the parachute opened, there was the Union Jack, which always brought the house down.
All over the world, whenever I saw the movie, instead of people howling and throwing stones at the Union Jack, they were bursting into a spontaneous applause, which was kind of satisfactory.
Even while the opening stunt films in Canada, the filmmakers worked to cast key roles, including the aquatic-obsessed villain Karl Stromberg.
I wish to conduct my life on my own terms.
Kurt Jürgens, I had got to know from some films in France, an outstanding actor.
I was instrumental in bringing Kurt in because I'd worked with Kurt on another picture.
At 12 noon, you will have reached firing positions.
He was a remarkable man. He spoke about 5 languages, but not only he spoke them, he could act in every one of them.
He was wonderful to work with. I mean, he's a magnificent character, a nice man.
For the part of Stromberg's henchman, the filmmakers take a page from Ian Fleming's novel. Although none of Fleming's story was to be used in the film, Cubby adapts Fleming's henchman horror with his metal braces into the steel-toothed jaws. played by 7'2" tall Richard Keel.
Cubby had the idea of Jaws. He thought it would be an interesting character.
I got called to have lunch with Cubby Broccoli. And he said that we're not sure exactly whether he's going to have teeth like a shark or they'll be like tools, but they'll be made out of like chromium steel, and he's going to kill people with his teeth. And all of a sudden I'm thinking, oh no, this is absurd, this is ridiculous.
One day I was asked if I would mind drawing some teeth. And I knew that they couldn't be pointy because I knew that, obviously he would hurt himself. So I started it from the sort of cogs grinding kind of idea that I had.
They flew me over to England, and I was taken to a dental technician's office out towards the studio.
And the next thing I knew, Richard was practicing wearing these very shiny teeth. And I know that they were uncomfortable. He didn't like them much.
Ever had a dental impression made? You know how that feels to have stuff up in the roof of your mouth?
If you can imagine, you've got a whole mouthful of silver put in. And it was agony. He could only keep them in for about 35 seconds, and then would start gagging.
And it made me very, very serious while I was trying to be humorous. And it was kind of an interesting combination.
Other more alluring parts are soon cast.
Finding new girls for Bond is a very, very difficult thing because they've got to be able to act a bit. They've got to be obviously beautiful and so on and so forth. And they get a bit thin on the ground.
Although I was desperate to be in the film, I remember saying, I don't want to be killed off, but I do want to be in your movie.
Hello?
Hello.
I have a message for you.
I think you just delivered it.
I'm Naomi. Mr. Stromberg sent me to collect you.
I did a big poster campaign in the 70s and early 80s. And the character that was portrayed in the posters was quite a strong character. I wore a wetsuit and I carried a knife. So she was quite strong. And supposedly, Cubby saw this image of this strong woman. And he said, I'd like to see her. Send her to my office. So that's what he did.
Only one major role is left to be cast, that of Major Anya Amasova.
We had, for the first time, a Russian spy going alongside James Bond.
Well, well, well. A British agent in love with a Russian agent. Détente indeed.
Women's Lib would be rather proud of her because she is his equal in every way and matches him all the way through the picture.
We have explored getting various well-known ladies.
We tested dozens of girls and we couldn't find anybody.
Danny Risner came to us, who was an executive at United Artists in the development department. And he said, I have a friend of mine who, she's an actress, and if you, why don't you look at her? Maybe you can find a small part for her.
We said, look, get her over quickly. We only had about 4 days, the usual panic.
We film tested her.
And we saw this test, and my God, we thought she was wonderful. She was very beautiful, and she was very good.
That's very odd, if it's true.
We all said, well, she's just right for the leading lady. Let's use her.
Anya is a very nice character, and it's probably the best female character that's ever been in a Bond film.
During pre-production, the filmmakers must discover a way to shoot the film's elaborate climax. At this stage, much of the battle scene is intended to take place on the deck of the supertanker.
We were originally going to use a real tanker.
And I said, well, we're going to have to use a miniature, Lewis, because, as you know, at the end, it blows up and sinks.
You say to yourself, well, let's film on a tanker. It'd be exciting. We can have our actors running around the tanker, and we want to have explosions and stuff like that.
Shell were quite happy because they told us that there would be a tanker leaving South Africa, having already taken off all the oil.
But it turns out, as I discovered, that actually empty tankers are more dangerous than they are full of fuel.
It leaves an enormous residue of gas, and if anybody goes in there with a spark or some cameraman decides to have a puff on his cigar, the entire thing could go.
The one thing that the company said, you can have it for nothing, but you must insure the ship while you're actually shooting on it.
We were told that the insurance would be £50,000 a day.
Even the James Bond budget could not afford the cost of insuring that tanker.
And as we came out of the meeting, dear old Lewis, walking beside me, looked up and he said, "Well, boy," he said, "it's all going to be a miniature."
To create the film's unique look, Cubby Broccoli relies on Academy Award-winning production designer and 5-time Bond veteran Ken Adam.
I was experimenting with new shapes because my designs had been very linear always, and I wanted to go into more curved shapes. So the design of Atlantis was all dome and curved surfaces. So it gave me an opportunity to do Kurt Stromberg's apartment with curve upon curve and so on, which I found very exciting.
Filming begins on Tuesday, August 31st, 1976, in Ken Adams' set of General Gogol's office.
Send in Agent Triple X.
I wanted to go big with Gogol's office as opposed to M's office.
Yes, I'll put our best man on it at once.
All done, tongue in the cheek with a sense of humor.
Ken Adams' designs perfectly mirror the humor of the script.
Bring tears to your eyes.
For one gadget, Adam brings in a specialist in linear induction accelerators.
That idea came from a Professor Laithwaite, who was a leading electronic engineer in London. And he devised this electronic river, as they call it, and it, to all intents and purposes, tray floated in midair.
I want that ready for Ahmed's tea party.
I'd always liked Q as a character. I always had an attraction to the scene in the laboratory. The audience perks up, and the minute they're in there, they're waiting for something unexpected to blow up or to happen.
On Wednesday, September the 15th, Lewis Gilbert begins directing his towering co-star.
At the end of the day, I had a terrible pain in my neck. Suddenly realised that I'd been looking up to 7'4" all day long.
Suddenly the character of Jaws, which we had seen at first as being an unmitigated menace, had a humorous side.
Lewis worked as a child on the stage in vaudeville, understood timing, understood humor.
Shaken, but not stirred.
He was a remarkable size, but like all giants, he was sweet and charming and a real pussycat.
The work is not all fun and games for Keel and the crew.
The first time I saw the movie, it scared me. I forgot, and I jumped.
They love train scenes in Bond.
One of the keys to writing a Bond movie is you have to do the same thing, but do it differently.
So we're saying that you're going to go through the train window.
Yes. To bring the scene to life takes hours of preparation. The entire sequence is choreographed by legendary stuntman Bob Simmons.
My main job here is arranging, organising action, ideas, and then developing them, and then, of course, shooting them.
They would rehearse the stunts way ahead of time. So if you weren't working in the scene as an actor, you were over in the stunt set where they had a mock-up of the train. You would go through these fights and all. And at first it was kind of boring because I wasn't used to it. But after a while, you started developing little things that added to the action.
How do you find a stunt double for a 7'2" actor? Filmmakers turn to Bob Simmons, who stands less than 6 feet tall.
You can really double anybody. See, a very famous old director called Raoul Walsh said if the action is good enough, it could be a monkey in top hat and spats.
He's a little shorter than I am, but he could double Richard because it's purely attitude and camera angle. And I must say, he was quite amazing.
He decided to do the scene where Jaws goes through the window, plate glass window of the train. And he used real glass, real plate glass, and took it with just his forehead, and the glass came out. And he suffered, because stuntmen never admit they're hurt. You know, he did have a few cuts, and I was quite amazed he was still alive.
Meanwhile, second unit director Ernie Day films a key sequence in Sardinia featuring the brand new hand-built mid-engine Lotus Esprit.
The Lotus lent itself beautifully with that very streamlined body to work as a submarine.
Soon the crew realizes they need a second car, and Peter Lamont handles the task of finding it.
I was dealing with a gentleman called Don McLaughlin, and so he said, but we don't have a second one. You know, we only make, so many a week. So I said, well, the chairman's got one. He said, but it's the chairman. So I said, well, ask him. So, of course, Colin Chapman was absolutely delighted that we wanted his car.
We did the famous scene where the Lotus comes out of the water. Of course, cars don't do that. Lotuses don't.
Where you see it coming up out of the water onto the beach, it was on a big cable which we pulled out.
The scene launches a Bond film tradition. For the next 2 movies, Moonraker and For Your Eyes Only, this mysterious character reappears.
That was a ghastly in-joke of Lewis Gilbert and myself. The man is called Victor Turjansky.
He was one of the best local assistant directors.
I have done a few parts here and there, like helping out, at the last moment when an actor was not on time or something. And they asked me to do it, so I said, well, let's try. Can I use a bottle? So I take like a double take. I was looking first at the Lotus, then at the bottle. He said, do anything you want to do, and let's see what happens. But he was happy.
Filmmakers had gotten the Lotus out of the water, but getting it into the water proves to be a difficult challenge.
Can you swim?
All that was done as a model in the Bahamas.
I said I needed, I think it was 7 cars, 7 shells. When it first went into the sea, that was shot with one of the dummy cars, had a big tube, it was like fired on air. And the first shot you see underwater was a miniature. When the wheels go up inside, that had to be 1 car. Then the arch filled in with like a fairing that filled in, that had to be another car. And then the fins came out, that was another car.
Everything's designed to operate for the 30 seconds or minute or however long the camera is running, just purely for that purpose. It doesn't work before, and it doesn't work afterwards.
We had 1 car that was sent to Perry Submarines in Miami, and they motorized it.
Old Man Perry was a real character. One of those fellows who was a designer engineer and always trying to do new things. So he thought that was a great challenge, and he did it. He turned one of these Lotus cars into a submarine.
It hasn't any air in it. It's just guys in wetsuits, and they breathe through breathing apparatus, so there's water inside the submarine.
The unit in the Bahamas also shoots the mammoth model of Stromberg's lair, Atlantis, the model submarines, and the biggest miniature of them all, the Liparis supertanker.
Because it had to swallow the submarines, I worked out a size for the submarines and then scaled the supertanker to the submarines.
He came up with a model of tanker that was about 65 feet long.
And we had a 48 horsepower Evinrude engine, which we didn't put outboard, we put it inboard. And that gave us the wash that we needed, because I'd looked at all these shots of supertanker, and you get something like I think it's a 3-mile wash behind it.
When the film was shown, we invited the people from Shell to come and see it.
We invited the captain of the vessel to the premiere.
They said, well, how did you get a real tanker? And we said, no, we didn't get a real tanker, that's a model.
The captain of that vessel didn't realise that there was not a single shot of his ship in the movie. It was all model.
They just couldn't believe it, because it was so realistic.
And that's probably one of the greatest compliments about a model unit you'll ever get.
When one is in Egypt, one should delve deeply into its treasures.
On the other side of the Atlantic, the first unit travels to Egypt.
We were only about 10 days or maybe 2 weeks before we were due to actually arrive to film, when we got a message from the government saying that they were taking over both hotels, lock, stock and barrel, during the period that we were going to be shooting.
It took 2 days to get a telephone call through to England.
We had difficulty, in fact, getting our film in and out, as there were no faxes, telephones or anything else that worked.
And the worst times were when we shot by the pyramids.
We went to the pyramids to see the Soleil Lumiere, whether it could be lit or not. It was impossible. You could light the Sphinx, but lighting the pyramids and that distance, you couldn't do it.
I also got over from Hollywood a brilliant visual effects artist.
Alan Maley was asked to come in and head up a team, and Alan asked me if I'd like to work with him on the optical unit. He'd won an Oscar for Bedknobs and Broomsticks, and he was Peter Lamont's cousin.
My cousin, who collaborated with us on the picture, he made the little models.
There were no pyramids, they never shot, all the pyramids were models, and all the audience were models. There was one shot they needed, which the first unit hadn't shot, was Roger standing and looking at the pyramids, and they never shot it. And they never shot a plate or anything. And Alan said, well, let's go to the publicity department and find out what stills there are of Roger, if there's any sort of profile shots of Roger. So we found this still of Roger looking. And Alan made a large print of it. And we actually did the cutaway of Roger washing the pyramids with a still frame, and nobody ever noticed it.
There were some problems the crew faced in Egypt that even a top visual effects unit could not solve.
The food was very depressing.
The food was pretty diabolical, there's no question about that.
I had a deputation from the crew saying, look, Bill, do you think we could just shoot right through this location and not bother with a day off?
Cubby then, who was a good general, said, we'll bring all the food from England in one big air-conditioned truck, refrigerated truck.
It was all being shipped in, and we had visions of this great kitchen coming in with his chef.
They opened the door to the truck, hoping to see all these wonderful legs of lamb, etc. Nothing. There was nothing in the truck at all, just empty.
For Cubby Broccoli, this is a key moment. This is his film, and his film alone.
I could see a lot of very upset technicians and workmen on them, and I very quickly had to think what I could do.
You know, it's the ultimate responsibility of the producer to feed and water the crew.
Being a sort of a cook around the house, and I do a lot of amateur cooking, I decided I would cook up a big spaghetti do for the boys, because I knew they all liked that sort of thing.
So Cubby got in a Jeep with one of the crew, and they went searching for pots and pans and pasta and tomatoes.
I had to fly someone into Cairo to get the spaghetti.
Cubby got in the catering wagon with his other caterers there, and he cooked all the mountains and mountains of spaghetti. This is the producer with an apron on, and he's cooking for the whole unit.
And they were so delighted. They all applauded at the end of it.
If you go to Ramesseum now, in the restaurant there, which we took over, there's a sign on the wall which says Trattoria Broccoli.
After that, Cubby could do no wrong.
Cubby was so loved by the crews on occasion, because he really cared about everybody.
I don't know any other producer in the world who would have gone to that trouble.
To show his appreciation for their hard work in Egypt, Cubby announces a paid holiday for the crew upon their return to London. Of course, the most challenging aspect of the film still had to be shot.
At the time, there was no stage which would have served both as a tank and big enough to house 3 nuclear-powered submarines.
We tried finding locations where we could find a huge hangar or something.
We looked all over the place for a place to do it.
That's where my decision has to come in, and that's where my decision did come in. We'll have to build a stage in the studio.
I decided not to make the same error, maybe, that I did on You Only Live Twice, when I designed the volcano crater on the back lot of Pinewood. We couldn't leave it standing because from the outside it was an eyesore. So this time I designed the stage around the set.
Now, what will lead you into the set, and which is going to be the submarine? Because remember, that's going to be pretty big in foreground.
Ken Adams' plan was to build the set inside as the outside went up.
I was instructed to document the growth of this extraordinary stage, and I would go up every day or once a week, depending on what kind of dramatic stuff was happening, and I would photograph it.
We were completing the set as they started to put the cover on and do the sides.
I think our major concern as filmmakers was it going to get up?
From the time we started to build the cover, 13 weeks later, we shot the set.
The design challenge was really to give that hold of the supertankers an interesting look.
It was, again, you know, a huge collaboration by all the trades to get it done, and the finishes in there were extraordinary.
So they built this huge, which became known as the 007 stage.
One of the chaps that was most interested in seeing how things were progressing was Claude Renoir, the cameraman.
Hold that frame, this one, then turn a little more. Turn it right. Right, yes.
Claude Renoir was one of the nicest and most capable directors of photography.
Claude, of course, was the grandson of Renoir the painter, who was one of the great cameramen of the world. I mean, Bardot wouldn't do a picture without him.
What I didn't know is that Claude was having some trouble with his eyesight.
I felt he was very nervous to be catapulted into a gigantic set like the interior of the supertanker, because he'd never had to deal with that sort.
I take him down there and show him this great, enormous set, and he looks at this thing, and I said to Claude, well, tell us what you're going to need here to light this thing. And he said, well, tell you the truth, Bill, I actually can't see the end of the set, so really it doesn't matter what I need because I can't see to the end of it.
Since the dimensions were enormous, I wanted to get another opinion in on how to use my practicals and whether to improve on them and so on.
For that second opinion, Ken Adam turns to legendary filmmaker Stanley Kubrick.
He said, I must be mad, you know, nobody must know.
Stanley would have done it in an extremely low-key, I'm not here kind of a way.
I will guarantee that nobody will ever know that you came. And I talked him into it.
He did do that and helped enormously.
Stanley came and spent 3 or 4 hours with me on that set.
It was a very difficult set to light, not only because of the vastness, but because of all the shiny surfaces.
I remember he said to Ken, why don't you use floodlights as part of the set lighting? So in effect, you're lighting the set.
The set is a triumph, securing Ken Adam and his team an Academy Award nomination. The 007 stage is launched on December the 5th, 1976, with all the fanfare of an aircraft carrier. Former Prime Minister Sir Harold Wilson performs the ceremony.
I felt a certain amount of pride when all these dignitaries arrived. It was quite exciting, really.
When you actually walk in the set and it's all dressed to film, it is extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary.
It was a wonderful set, and it looked terrific on the screen.
It was bigger inside than it was outside, if you know what I mean. You stood at the end of it, and it was like, wow.
The Spy Who Loved Me premieres July the 7th, 1977. 7777 proves to be a very lucky date for James Bond, and for the sole producer of the James Bond films, Albert R. Cubby Broccoli.
The success of Spy was important.
It was Cubby's first film as the sole producer of the Bond movies. We all knew it was going to be one of the greatest films.
The film's worldwide success proves once and for all that nobody does it better.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Good night.
In the first James Bond film, Dr. No, there comes a moment when the audience knows undeniably that the world of 007 is a world unlike any other. This was the first of many imaginative, stylized sets designed by one of the cinema's greatest visual artists, Ken Adam.
Ken Adam, the production designer, was very much a key element in what became the success of James Bond, i.e. the opulence, the size, the importance of the sets.
One of the great designers of all time.
Ken is a brilliant production designer. He's a genius, and I don't use that word lightly.
I think Ken is probably one of the foremost people who are actually responsible for the success of the Bond films.
Ken Adams' contribution is immense to all the Bond movies.
Ken Adams' contribution is beyond description.
I left Germany at the age of 13 in 1934 because of Hitler, and then came to England.
Ken was is the only German that flew for the RAF during World War II.
And eventually got my younger brother to join my wing just before the end of the war.
But he was a real hero because he, unlike his brother, who'd become naturalized because he went into British intelligence, Ken never was naturalized, and so he was serving in the Air Force, but he was still a German. So if he had been shot down and captured, he'd have been executed as a traitor.
After leaving the RAF in 1946, I had about an 8-month period out of work and then started at Riverside Studios as a junior draftsman on a film.
Within 10 years, Adam becomes recognized as one of Europe's best film designers. He's soon hired by producer Albert R. Cubby Broccoli.
I did The Trials of Oscar Wilde for Cubby, which was a great artistic success. Harry Saltzman I met in Italy on some of the films I worked in Italy. So when Harry and Cubby decided to do Dr. No, they both asked for me to design it. I was fortunate in as much as both of them knew me and knew my work. So Cubby sent me Dr. No.
I really think Ken Adams' sets, when they went back to England and they made these unbelievable sets, I think that's what brought it up from sort of being a kind of low-budgety, okay film to being something really special.
I contacted all the heads of departments at Pinewood Studios and asked them to come up with new materials, not the old film construction materials. And they were very encouraging, and because they were very encouraging and supportive, I then started designing sets, imaginative sets, which otherwise, if I wouldn't have had that backup, I probably wouldn't have done. This, you can only call it tongue-in-the-cheek, slightly ahead of its time type of concept. One felt the public wanted to see as much of Ursula Andress and Sean in various stages of undress. Again, trying to keep it simple, but sexy.
Even the simplest sets require imaginative thinking.
It was a small set, but I think it was very effective. I did it all out of like a gunmetal set. And then I inclined the walls in.
Other sets call for expert advice.
None of us had any ideas, certainly not in 1962, what a nuclear water reactor looked like. So I managed to talk to some scientists at Harwell. And after giving me advice on this or that, they said that that's what a nuclear water reactor looks like.
When it comes time to do the next 007 film, From Russia with Love, Ken Adam is busy on another project, Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove.
What's with that trick pool tape?
But Adam returns for Goldfinger. One of Adam's assistants on the film is Peter Lamont.
Ken's art director, Peter Merton, called me one day and said, look, we're going to do a James Bond film called Goldfinger. Would you be interested in coming to do drafting for us?
When he started with me on Goldfinger, I think both he and his brother Michael, they were two young draftsmen.
So I bowled up on the first morning and got my drawing board set up. Ken came in, he said, well, I don't know you, but I'd like you to do this. And he gave me Fort Knox, the exterior.
The film provides a sterling showcase for Ken Adams' work. From Goldfinger's rumpus room...
The gold depository at Fort Knox, gentlemen.
...to the laser room...
And members of your curious profession are few in number.
...to the interior of Fort Knox itself.
I was, of course, overwhelmed by the great Ken Adams set of Fort Knox. I'd never seen anything like it. And it was marvelous to work in a set like that. It gives you another dimension to what you feel.
You can't easily say that if it had been somebody else and not Ken Adam, it would have been unique. It's his vision that really created the world in which Bond lives.
Thunderball poses a challenge of a different sort, designing watercraft.
I was so fortunate on all the Bond films, starting with Johnny Stairs, who was a brilliant engineer.
You'd sketch them first. What do you think about this, Johnny? Can we do this? Can you do it? You know, what are the problems? Can you see problems in this?
The thing about what his ability that struck me the most was being able to look at a piece of paper and turn it into reality.
Somebody comes up with a nuclear bomb carrier, and much to my surprise, Jordan Klein in Miami, Florida, he said, Ken, that's fine. I said, don't tell me you can accept this design. He said, we'll make it work. And that always happens on the Bonds, much to my amazement. I never forget the biggest nightmare for everybody was that Disco Volante.
They found this old hydrofoil.
I came up with a design to increase the length of the hydrofoil by building like a catamaran around the back of it to make it look like a bigger yacht.
Jack Manson built in Allied Marine this cocoon.
Jettison cocoon.
Thunderball also features another eye-popping Ken Adams set, Spectre Headquarters. Like Goldfinger's rumpus room before it, it's an animated set. The shattering success of Thunderball allows Ken Adam to give his imagination free rein with the next Bond film, You Only Live Twice.
It was almost the cartoon effect, I call it, because his sets were just so jaw-dropping, and they got more sophisticated and more elegant, and they added a depth of sinister to the baddie. If you take a look at, say, the mountain on You Only Live Twice, it was... Where else would Blofeld have lived?
We hadn't found the locations that Fleming had talked about, so somebody came up with the idea, wouldn't it be fun if we had the villain inside that extinct crater?
He would settle down and he'd produce the most amazing drawings.
I came up with a scribble about that size.
He didn't worry too much about the cost.
I could see it more or less three-dimensionally, but I also knew that it had to be gigantic.
This, of course, he was the perfect man for.
The dimensions were unbelievable. I mean, the long shot was 450 feet.
There, I thought you really did have a genius.
The Las Vegas locale of Diamonds Are Forever showcases another spectacular setting for Blofeld.
What appealed to me there was that the Willard White character was loosely based on a friend of Cubby's who was Howard Hughes. And it gave me an opportunity to design his penthouse in Las Vegas, how I felt it should be.
Adam also has to design a suite for 007.
The waterbed became the central part of the suite. And I thought it would be nice to see the fish swimming around in the waterbed. Well, that's easier said than done. And in fact, it became a gigantic problem because I had to design like plexiglass aquariums all around the waterbed in which the fish were swimming, and the weight was unbelievable.
Of course, no Bond film is complete without a laboratory.
Now, will you get out of here?
Certainly, Doctor. I've seen everything I need to see.
Or out of the ordinary vehicles.
Get him
want that machine, that isn't a toy.
Now, we had a lot of problems with that because I tried to use the actual wheels for this moon buggy, and they kept breaking, and the suspension kept breaking until we finally got it right.
Adam is absent from the next 2 Bond films, Live and Let Die and The Man with the Golden Gun. After winning an Academy Award for his work on Barry Lyndon, Adam returns to the world of 007 with The Spy Who Loved Me.
I remember the first scene in The Spy Who Loved Me of Gogol's office. Very simple, but incredibly effective.
I wanted to go big with Gogol's office as opposed to M's office. I wanted to do it the opposite way. I was inspired by Eisenstein, and I designed a sort of crypt-like structure of a Russian Orthodox cathedral or church. I knew when I had that idea, it was a good idea. I always feel one chair or one painting or one something can give more of a message to the audience than by overdressing it. I thought it was fun to set M's office in one of the tombs. It wasn't a difficult set to design, but a difficult set to paint. Fresco painting, a normal studio painter would not know how to deal with it, whereas a scenic painter who has worked for theater and opera is more capable of doing it. And that was half the secret, to make all those frescoes look believable.
Once again, Adam is faced with designing a villain's headquarters in an unusual location.
I was experimenting with new shapes.
The style of a Bond movie has got to look great. It's no good coming into a room and suddenly opening a book and handing an atlas to somebody. No, you have to come in. Somebody has to press a button. Half the wall has to spread apart. Thousands of screens have to light up. And Ken does that absolutely magnificently.
The major problem was for the plasterers at Pinewood, because it was a curved set. It had a curved ceiling. We sent a second unit to Okinawa to get all the footage of interesting-looking fish for the various sort of portholes and Stromberg's apartment.
I wish to conduct my life on my own terms and in surroundings with which I can identify.
The dining room I was a little scared about. I wanted to show the early Renaissance paintings and then surprise the audience by these paintings going up and revealing that this room is underwater. They were megalomaniacs, but why shouldn't they have a Picasso or a Rembrandt or whatever?
Everything was real in his sets. I mean, if it was timber, he got mahogany and always very expensive. We're going to blow this lot up. Yeah, everything gets blown up in Bond, which is rather sad.
Adam also creates the shark pool, where Stromberg dispatches those who displease him.
I came up with that sort of gun-like structure of being catapulted into the shark tank.
The highlight of The Spy Who Loved Me is one of Adam's most ambitious 007 sets, the interior of Stromberg's supertanker.
Certainly the supertanker set was one of the biggest interior sets ever done. At the time, there was no stage which would have served both as a tank and big enough to house 3 nuclear-powered submarines.
How in the world can we do that? There's no stage in Europe that could hold such a set. I came up with the idea of building the 007 stage, which ended up having 3 atomic submarines side by side in the stage.
I designed the stage around the set and used really the structure as part of the set, which was a very exciting challenge. I did my sketch. The set was translated into models.
He would stand in his office hour after hour, just drawing these extraordinary drawings. And they were always very grand, big sets. He drew all his sketches with felt tip. He had lots of different felt tips, from black through to the palest grey.
We've done corridor after corridor after corridor. And I came up with this shape in the suspended floor and 2 or 3 openings in the side of the corridor, and the whole set was able to tilt. It is my favorite set. Nobody realized how much water was being catapulted into that set and the strength of that water. And Barbara was absolutely panicking. That's not acting, an actual look of extreme fear and panic on her face as she's hit by that avalanche of water.
Stromberg has a custom-designed escape pod.
It was almost like a miniature version of Atlantis somehow.
Adams' designs for The Spy Who Loved Me earn him his 3rd Academy Award nomination.
I think it is the best Bond picture I've ever done.
Next came Moonraker, a production so huge, one studio was not enough.
There were 3 studios in Paris, and we took over every one of them.
I also met some brilliant construction people in Paris, you know. The person who built that centrifuge was unbelievable. In fact, Derek was insanely jealous. He said, "Ken, why do you have to build it full size? Let me build a model of it." I said, "We're going to build it full size. We always try on a Bond to give reality, so let's build it."
Moonraker once again had the requisite laboratory.
I loved that laboratory. Laboratories normally are tables with Bunsen burners and a lot of retorts and so on, and they're always dull, I find. So I came up with this idea of these cylindrical shapes in a famous Venetian 15th century palace.
Moonraker also requires more watercraft.
I designed the boat with that hang glider built into the roof of the boat. It was always a challenge because you had to come up with a different idea for each of the Bond films. I did 7 Bond films, and each one created a new problem or a new challenge.
With Moonraker, Adam met the challenge with an unusual variation on the villain's lair.
I came up with this, what we call the Great Chamber. What I was trying to do was to create a transition set between the jungle in South America and the villain's lair. It was a costly set, it was a difficult set to put up. At the same time, I tried to get some of the Aztec culture in it. So I used Aztec sculpture and paintings on glass and so on. And that exhaust chamber was not an easy set to construct because it was on a curve. It was built partly in perspective, so all the elements had to reduce.
Like many Ken Adams sets before it, this one was animated. The space station takes Ken Adams' designs to new heights.
I had done some research with NASA.
Ken Adams took those ideas and amplified them into a full-fledged Ken Adams space station.
So I did my first sketches, and then in the art department we built a little model of it. I had to use a lot of plastic materials for the cladding of the various elements. And we had to have big explosions in the set. When the explosion happened, the whole set caught fire, and even though we had 6 Paris fire engines standing by, they had to work all through the night to extinguish the fire. It was certainly the biggest budget Bond that I ever did. I think visually we gave them everything but the sky. We gave them space.
From the outset, the Bond films have been visually stunning, thanks in large part to the contributions of talented artists like Ken Adam.
Ken, I think, honestly contributed an incredible amount to the success of Bond, an incredible amount.
He really stamped a style on the Bond films right from the onset.
I'm not so sure that there's a long list or even a short list of people who could have created what Ken created.
I just really wish it won an Academy Award for it, because I think it really put design in this country on the map.
Beautiful sets. Great eye.
If I have any claim to fame, I suppose I've shot on the 3 biggest sets ever built for motion pictures. And I owe Ken Adam thanks for that.
My name is Bond, James Bond. My latest, and if I'm not careful, my last assignment will take me to new heights of adventure, new depths of danger, new dimensions of villainy, and fascinating new women. But every job has its rewards. In this case, it's the spy who loved me.
Don't move.
James, we've only got 3 minutes.
Don't forget The Spy Who Loved Me, coming this summer. If you're looking for a change of scene this summer, how about these locations? If you're looking for some thrills and excitement, you've got a date.
James Bond, and the woman is
Major Masov, a Russian agent. Let them get ashore and then kill him.
Don't forget The Spy Who Loved Me, coming this summer.
It's the biggest, it's the best, it's Bond. And beyond.
James Bond. And the woman is Major Masova, a Russian agent. Let them get ashore and then kill him.
Watch out!
In our business, Anne, your people get killed. We both know that.
Then, when this mission is over, I will kill you.
Within minutes, New York and Moscow will cease to exist.
There's Anya on there.
I know, James. I'm sorry.
I have to get her off.
How?
Well, well, well. A British agent in love with a Russian agent.
Your time's running out, Stromberg.
Yours too, Mr. Bond. Yours too.
It's the biggest, it's the best, it's Bond. And beyond.
My name is Bond. James Bond. Since we first met, you've joined me on 9 of my missions. My latest, and if I'm not careful, my last assignment, will take me to new heights of adventure. New depths of danger. And new areas of excitement.
I have a message for you.
I think you just delivered it. I will come to grips with my most formidable adversaries, be up against the most fascinating women, and handle some of the most fantastic equipment you've ever seen. It won't be easy. But every job has its rewards. In this case, it's the spy who loved me.
It's the biggest. It's the best. It's Bond.
You ever get the feeling somebody doesn't like you?
And beyond. Roger Moore is James Bond.
Keep going.
In the newest, most fantastic 007 adventure of all. The Spy Who Loved Me. He makes his most beautiful friends.
I have a message for you.
I think you just delivered it.
And meets his most dangerous enemies. It's the biggest. It's the best. It's Bond. And beyond. The Spy Who Loved Me. Rated PG. It's the biggest. It's the best. It's Bond.
You ever got the feeling somebody doesn't like you?
And beyond. The Spy Who Loved Me. It takes James Bond to new heights of excitement and new depths of danger. The Spy Who Loved Me. Rated PG. It's the biggest. It's the best. It's Bond. And beyond. The Spy Who Loved Me. He makes his most beautiful friends and meets his most dangerous enemies. The Spy Who Loved Me. Rated PG. Biggest. It's the best. It's Bond. And beyond. Roger Moore is James Bond. The Spy Who Loved Me. Rated PG.
It's the biggest. It's the best. It's Bond. And beyond.
Roger Moore is James Bond.
Handsome but better.
In the newest, most fantastic 007 adventure of all. The Spy Who Loved Me. Rated PG.
My name is Bond, James Bond. Since we first met, you've joined me on 9 of my missions. My latest, and if I'm not careful, my last assignment, will take me to new heights of adventure and new areas of excitement.
Oh, dear.
It won't be easy, but every job has its rewards. In this case, it's the spy who loved me.
Roger Moore is James Bond, the spy who loved me. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested.
Intended to whet our appetites.